This is about the DIY build of a camper from a Jeep trailer. I started with a tandem axle flatbed trailer towing our 1942 Jeep. But if there were a way to build a top, it would have to meet three requirements. One, obviously it would need to hold a Jeep. Two, the inside would need to be tall enough for me to walk upright without stooping. I'm almost 6 feet. And three, it would still need to fit into my garage. I can tell you that no toy hauler on the market fits those specs. I started by pulling off all the 2x8 decking since I wanted the whole trailer to be watertight, and the decking plus flooring plus the roofing would not leave enough room inside for me to walk around and still be able to back it into the garage. You might ask why it had to go in the garage. Well, the community in which we live will not allow trailers to be stored in driveways or yards. In prepping the frame, I used Must for Rust to treat any rusted area, followed by the Rust-Oleum Rust Reformer Spray, leaving each to dry overnight before continuing. Finally, I painted the wheel wells with Rust-Oleum, satin black for additional protection. The tires were only a year or so old, so I removed all four and pressure washed the rims to clean everything up before continuing. I wasn't too worried about weight since I had two 3,500-pound axles and a 1,400-pound trailer. The Jeep weighs about 2,400 pounds, so I had room to spare for the shell to be built. The only issue I had with height was the height with the roll bar on the Jeep, so I shrunk the Jeep to easily fit. Actually, I remounted the roll bar with pins so it would simply lift out for trailering. We don't do any off-roading anymore that would require a roll bar, so its primary use is to support the canvas top anyway. I was not too far along when my brother bought a camper, and since I was already building a cover for the trailer, why not take the extra steps and insulate it so we could use it as a camper? Certainly the project instantly became more involved, but nonetheless doable. I had an old dorm refrigerator and a microwave we were not using, so if we camped where we had facilities, we'd be all set. So on with the build. I used 3/4-inch ground contact pressure-treated plywood for flooring. That gave me a little more headroom than the former 2x8 boards. The flooring had been glued, screwed, and sealed with silicone around all the edges. I still planned to have the Jeep run up on 2x6s to distribute the wheel weight over the length of the trailer. I widened the trailer by about a foot without changing any steel so as not to affect the structural integrity of the trailer. I did this by adding a top 2x8 all along the edge rail. The space underneath the rail would become storage from the inside. Notice I had to pay close attention to the overall height, considering I had to add ceiling, paneling, insulation, and roofing material. I also learned how to use a pocket hole jig. That's my newest favorite tool to add structural integrity to the 2x2 joined structural members. The roof was framed with 2x2-inch lumber on 12-inch centers. I pre-stained the ceiling panels with pre-mixed polystain. Once the basic outer supports and roof frame was in place, I nailed up the ceiling panels and went to Lowe's for the installation and siding. I used 1.5-inch solid foam insulation to completely fill the void between the ceiling panel and the roofing paneling to make it a solid sandwich. The same sandwich is used for the walls. That produces an R7 insulation value, and the roof is strong enough to climb up there and have an afternoon cocktail. The paneling used for the exterior is a Louisiana Pacific product called Utility Panel Board. When I spoke to Louisiana Pacific, they said the paneling used the same exterior glue as their siding and had the same waterproof pre-primed paper laminate as their siding, but the product is slightly thinner and weighs less. It was a perfect fit for my application. Once the insulation was cut and wedged into place between the 2x2 rafters, my wife and I taped the seams to make it all airtight before gluing and screwing down the roofing panels. Once glued and screwed, it was caulked and 3 coats of deck primer sealer was applied. I bought the deck primer sealer solid stain from Home Depot as an oops bargain for $30 for 5 gallons. I created the cardboard templates to go around the wheel wells and frame the sides at 16 inches on center. As I said, the exterior paneling was glued and screwed to the framing. Once I had the top and sides all buttoned up, I gently backed it into the garage. All the measurements worked since I could walk around in it, and it would fit into my garage with little less than a 1/2 inch to spare. This is what it looked like on the inside, and this is what the back door configuration looked like opened up and now closed. You'll notice two doors. The one on the left is a narrow passage door, large enough to get through, but small enough to keep heat and cool in the camper. The wide right-hand door is open to drive the Jeep in and out of and just leave open in good weather. It was time to see if the Jeep would fit. With the roll bar lifted out of the way, we drove it into the trailer. You can see the 2x6s that the Jeep rides on inside the trailer to help distribute the weight. Here's a shot of the front, and here's one towards the back when you are inside the trailer. It's easy to see there's not much wiggle room in the front or the rear, but it fits, and that's the important part. The fender wells were loose where they had been tacked to the frame, so I took it to my local favorite mechanic, David Yearwood's Auto, and he tacked it all back together. Once tacked back up, I siliconed the seams and painted the welding places. Now for the interior. We used the same 1.5-inch solid insulation and paneled the inside with the same material as the ceiling, but only used clear poly on the walls. The paneling we used for the interior was from Home Depot and is actually flooring underlayment, less than 1/4 inch thick, but it looks great with poly and was less than $14 a sheet. Again, all the seams were taped prior to putting in the interior paneling. All in the plan was a place for a refrigerator and microwave. The refrigerator stands 25 1/4 inches tall, and the hood of the Jeep was over 40 inches tall. That meant if I built a permanent shelf that the Jeep could barely drive under, I should have 1/8 of an inch left over to slide the fridge onto the shelf. It would be tight, but it should work. I put in the shelf and began wiring for electricity as my wife, Jill, polyurethane the entire inside of the trailer. I wanted the beds to be as light as possible because they would need to fold up and down and even easily removed when not needed. I trimmed down 2x2s to 1 inch thickness and built an 1-inch-thick frame surrounding 1-inch-thick solid foam insulation. The top of the platform was covered with carpet, and the bottom was the interior paneling we used everywhere else. I'm guessing each bed platform weighs about 10 pounds and is substantial enough to sleep on. The insulation in the panel helps us keep comfortable at night even if the camper's cold. When in place, it looks pretty good, I think. I cut 1-inch pieces to insert along inside under the beds and in front and covered them with carpet. They press nicely into the sides to create storage as well as insulate the camper. I had a buddy trip already planned to take the Jeep to Florida, so I loaded up the Jeep and the tools and headed south. Jack, a brother from a different mother, offered to paint it for me, and here's a shot of halfway done. Since the Jeep is army green and my Kia Telluride is dark moss, it seemed to be the thing to do to paint the camper a light shade of those two colors. I bought the best exterior semi-gloss paint Lowe's had to offer, and Jack did a great job of painting it. The RV windows came in right before I left for Florida, so the installation was part of the work done at the Hog Heaven, our Florida camp. With help from my brother, the first one to go in was the back window and the larger door. The side windows along with the rear window made a huge improvement to the overall look of the camper. Next, I repurposed an old RV electrical panel and installed both 120 and 12-volt systems. With much donated by my brother, I used a typical battery box to hold a 12-volt battery and a waterproof cargo box for the shore power cord and battery tender. The Tide pod container houses the cord and allows the cord to pull out to connect to shore power without getting tangled up with the other wiring. The battery tender is attached to the top of the Tide container, and a duplex outlet is attached to the side of the container. The 12-volt line from the battery comes up from the bottom and is fused with a master shutoff when the camper is not in use. I built a water heater out of a 5-gallon water tote by installing a 120-volt water heater element in series with a thermostat attached to the side of the tote. Yes, it does work, but you have to be careful and never let the water level go below the level of the element. With this restriction, we heat the water and then switch off the power. I have a 12-volt water pump mounted on top of the tote, so we have plenty of pressure when we're connected to shore power or not. If not, I have a generator that we can use to heat the water when needed. It takes about 20 minutes to heat up the tote of water from a cold start. I bought 2 scissor jacks from Harbor Freight using a coupon and mounted them upside down under the back to stabilize the camper when it's parked. We already had a white panel heater that I hung on the front wall that keeps the chill out of the camper, and was even warm enough to cause my wife to turn it off in the middle of the night when we were camping. Here's a shot of the camper with the sink table unfolded. Here we are ready to head out to the first camping trip. You can see the leveling blocks stored in the back gate. We refer to the back gate as the patio when we're camping. Well, here's our campsite. Our first trip. We only had a tarp for an awning, but I'll have created a rollout awning for our next adventure. Hope you enjoyed the build process. Here are a few more shots from the trip. Campfire at the Webb's first campfire.